Okay, we're going to start today on Daf Ches. By Rebbe Elazar Aimer B'Shamay Aimer. It's not Rebbe Elazar, it's really Rebbe Elazar. Actually, it's corrected, it's Rebbe Elazar. It's not so clear who it is. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day. Big schos. And in the schos of our learning, we should have the base of Mikdash immediately. And it should be well and safe. It says like this. The case was there were four brothers, two of them were married to sisters. Those two brothers passed away, and then the other two brothers were left to do Yibam. The problem is that it's each one is the sister of a woman that he could have married, which is called the Chaysik Kukaset, which is a quasi-wife. So you can't marry your wife's sister. Each one is like a quasi-wife sister. So they're not allowed to get married, but they do chalitza. That's what the Mishnah said. Rabbi Eliezer said, well, then the Mishnah added in one point, that if they did get married, they have to get divorced. This is a very strict law. Rabbi Eliezer says, Beis Shammai holds that no, they can remain married. And Beis Hillel says no, they have to get divorced. So Tanya was taught in a brisa. Brisa is going to give us more opinions than what we were exposed to in the Mishnah. It's a quote from a Tosefta that Beis Shammai says that they're allowed to remain married. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, right? We had that Levi and Yehuda were married to the two sisters and they passed away, and then Reuven and Shimon did chalitza. In this case, it was Yibam. Beis Shammai says they can stay married. Beis Hillel says they have to get divorced. Reb Shimon Aimer Yekaimu. Reb Shimon says that they can stay married. The Gemara is going to ask in a moment which opinion is Reb Shimon following. Is he arguing about what Beis Shammai holds, or is he repeating what Beis Hillel holds? Abba Shaul says it's exactly the opposite. What comes out for us, the way we just quoted Rebbe Elazar, is that Beis Shammai is the lenient opinion. They can remain married. And Beis Hillel was the strict opinion. They have to get divorced. According to Abba Shaul, it's exactly the opposite. Beis Hillel follows what they usually follow. Abba Shaul would be more, what we would guess would be the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel is lenient. Beis Hillel says they can remain married. Okay, we go back now. We're on Chav Ches. It's like 9 lines from the bottom. Thank you. Reb Shimon Kaman. Who does Reb Shimon follow? Ika Beis Shammai. If he followed, Reb Shimon just said that Yikaimu, they're allowed to remain married. The Yibam was performed on two sisters from two different brothers. So, there's no issue there. There's no real issue there. Right. But here you're marrying your brother's wife. Your brother's widow, I should say. The point is, though, that there was a theoretical issue right when she became eligible for marriage, that her sister was also eligible for marriage. And not only eligible, but there was also what's called Zika. There was an attachment to both of them. And that being the case, then there's an issue now to complete the marriage on one of them when there was already an attachment to the other one. That's the complication. It's called the Chaysik Kukaset. Okay. So, who is Reb Shimon saying? Who is Reb Shimon saying like when he says Yikaimu, that they can remain married? Ika Beis Shammai. If he's saying Beis Shammai, well, Hainu Rebbe Elazar. That's exactly what Rebbe Elazar says. Why is Reb Shimon just saying something that Rebbe Elazar already said? Ika Beis Hillel, Hainu Abba Shaul. If he's saying that Beis Hillel is saying that they can remain married, that's what Abba Shaul held, Beis Hillel held. So Achi Kamar. Gemara answers, Leinachliku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel b'davar zeh. What Reb Shimon is saying is that there's no machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's what Reb Shimon is saying. Okay, we have that sometimes. We have sometimes we have a problem when there's a machlekes Beishami and Beisilal, and a third mandamar steps in and says an opinion. We say, who's he saying? He's saying Beishami's opinion. He's saying Beisil's opinion. What do we need this? And the Gemara answers that no, he's actually saying that in his tradition there was no argument between Beishami and Beisilal. That's okay. Now the Gemara says, "Haysa achas mem." If one of them was a close relative, it means one of the wives was a close relative of one of the brothers, the remaining brothers. How would that be a close relative? So we said like this, that maybe, what was that case? Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and what was our example? That Reuben and Shimon were going to do Yibam on the wives of Levi and Yehuda that had just recently passed away. Now, who were those wives? So, turns out that Reuven had a daughter, and her name was Leah, and she got married to Levi. Levi married his niece. And Shimon had a daughter, her name was Rachel, and she got married to Yehuda. Yehuda married his niece. So now, Levi and Yehuda passed away. Now, Reuven and Shimon have to do Yibam. So Reuven can't do Yibam on his daughter. He's not going to marry his daughter, but he can marry his niece, which is his sister-in-law. So he can marry Yehuda's wife. And Shimon can't do on Yibam on his daughter. Well, anyway, Reuven was doing it. But he can go to Levi's wife, which is his niece from Shimon. Shimon's son. Okay, that's the whole elaboration of the Mishnah. But we start with case one. Case one was where Reuven has a relative in that amongst those sisters. Is it possible that amongst those sisters? Yeah, because they share the same. They can share the same mother. They don't have to share the same. How could they share the same mother? That means that Reuven married a woman that Shimon was married to. How do they share the same mother? We're going to see soon that it had to be that they had a woman that they weren't actually married to. And they had Reuven had a daughter with this woman. And Shimon had a daughter with this woman. Without marriage. And then they each have a daughter this is a complicated case, but that's, anyway, what would come out is that these two, Rachel and Leah and Rachel are sisters. They're married to a brother, to each brother, which happens to be their uncles. And now when these two husbands pass away, so now the fathers show up to do. Okay, so let's take a look. The Gemara says, "Hatanina chadazimna." This business with one of the wives that's a sister happens to be a relative of the brother that's doing Yibam that we had in the Mishnah earlier. The Gemara's the Gemara challenges why the Mishnah should have to repeat. Yeah, what we do to a pasuk and chumash, that why do we need an extra word? The Gemara does that to Mishnayos also. Why do you have to say the same thing again? What's the new Mishnah telling us? We had it in an earlier chapter. So Hatanina chadazimna, we had this earlier. Achaisik sheyevimta. The sister, which is the Yevama, could do Yibam or Chalitza. But there was the same case. He was forbidden to one sister and he was permitted to the other sister. Zimna means time. Chad zimna, one time. Yeah. Tanina chad zimna. Yeah, the Gemara, that's usually a problem that the Gemara has. And it's only a problem when it was very obviously stated exactly the same thing. If it wouldn't have been so obvious, then the Gemara would have said that, and this is what we learned also in the Mishnah, and it would be no problem that we had another Mishnah. Okay, but here, because it was so obvious, exactly the same thing, so it says, okay, the Gemara answers Stricha. Yashmin and Hassam, over there, when we said this, Mishum delek lemigzam mishum sheni. Aval hachadik lemigzam mishum sheni emalai. It's happening by us, at least in case number one. Case number one was that one brother, one of the remaining brothers, has a close relative, possibly a daughter, amongst those sisters. The other brother, in case number one, did not have a relative there. Case number two, we're going to have the other brother, Shimon, also has a relative. The other wife was his daughter. Okay, but in case number one, we thought that maybe we could make a decree. Maybe there should be a decree. Over there, when we had this Mishnah before, we didn't have two brothers involved over here. We only had one brother remaining. And one of the wives was his relative. So we said there's no problem with marrying the other sister. We didn't have a second brother that also had a story here. A second brother remaining that had a problem doing Yibam on both. We didn't have that other brother here. That's in the first case, we only had three brothers. Two of them passed away, leaving two sisters widows, two wives widows, and sisters also. So over here we say, there could be a decree that what's going to happen over here? The second brother, maybe you're going to think, should also be allowed to do some sort of Yibam, because the first brother just did Yibam. So maybe we should make a decree on the first brother that he shouldn't be allowed to, because there's another brother here that's not eligible. So we say that's what it's teaching us. V'yashmin and hacha, and if we would just say it over here, mishum dika sheni, the kamuchach. You know what's going on over here? There's an advantage. Over here I have two brothers. One of them is allowed to do Yibam, one of them is not. That's very positive for us, because one of them is showing us that there's a problem of achayse kukase, of doing Yibam on two sisters that are eligible for Yibam. So that's teaching us that even though we have one brother that is allowed to do Yibam, why is he allowed to do Yibam? Because one of those sisters is his daughter. So he's allowed to do Yibam on the other one, because the daughter has no attachment to him in this marriage, in the Yibam marriage, because he would never be allowed to marry her anyway. So really, there's only one sister that's eligible. So we're seeing a permissible case. But that doesn't bother us. You see, a permissible case could bother us because we say, what's going on? People are going to see that he's marrying a chayse kukasai. You say, oh, don't worry about that. We have the other brother that's resolving that for everyone by showing us that he's prohibited from doing it. So in the same scenario, we have the permissibility and the prohibition. So we know no one's going to make any mistake. But over there, there's only one brother, and we're saying that he's allowed to do Yibam on the other one that's not his daughter, on the other sister. People may say, wow, Achaysikakasi is mutter. So we could say that maybe over there it wouldn't be allowed. That's why he needs to say it twice.
It's interesting how everything is done through a bezdin. If the bezdin says yes, oh, this case is different. And here, on one hand, we're worried about what people are going to say. That, on the other hand, everything is being done through a big bezdin. This is not a simple thing. Doing Yibam or doing the other case, it's there's witnesses. There's a whole. It's interesting how the Gemara one time does worry about what people think. Sometimes we don't worry what people think.
Well, he's asking a good question.
I mean, I'm not sure.
Saying that this should really be a shaila more when it's just a regular marriage. But because over here it's Yibam, so maybe that's the answer. I just thought of the answer. Chalitza is done in front of a bezdin. But Yibam is, I don't know what, if there's a bezdin, he just marries her. In front of
before you do Yibam, the bezdin have to say that this is
maybe it's a phone call. I don't know if it's like a whole ceremony. Chalitza is a whole ceremony. You have a lot of people there. It's supposed to be in front of a lot of people. But Yibam,
we just learned from the beginning. You want to see how complicated it is. You have to know is this call for Yibam or not?
Right.
But
right. I'll tell you. that there's some people that live in Borough Park. There's some people live in Yerushalayim. There's also some people that live in Wyoming. So the Yibam that takes place in Borough Park in Yerushalayim and something like that. So it's a big deal with the Rabbanim. The one that's in Wyoming, they ask the president of the shul that he used to live in Borough Park. He used to live in Yerushalayim. So what do you think? Is it acceptable? So I remember my uncle, for sure it's fine. My grandfather was a sheikhet. Okay. Isser mitzvah. Mishnah went on. Said, when there's a close relative amongst those two sisters, one of the remaining brothers is a close relative. So even though normally you can't do yibam on one of those two sisters because it has this prohibition of a kukasai, but if it's a close relative, an isser erva, like a daughter, we said, so then that would be permissible to do yibam, to marry, yibam is the levirate marriage, on the other sister, because the first one has no attachment, because it's a daughter. Okay. Then the Mishnah goes on and says, let's say that relative is not so close. It's an isser mitzvah. We call that shniyos. It's from the outer circle of relatives. It's rabbinically prohibited. We don't marry that. It's a little bit distant. A great aunt or something that's not as close. So what happens then? So the Mishnah said that over there you have to do chalitza. You can't do yibum. It's not enough because biblically both of them are eligible, and so therefore the rabbinic law of achis sikukasai kicks in, and you can't do yibum on them. Okay. Gemara says hanami tanina that we also learned before. Yes, a mitzvah kedusha chaltzas v'leimas. Over there again in that Mishnah in the second parak when we had this before, we said that what page are we on? We're right on top of 28b. We said this exactly before, that there's a brother that's related to one of these sisters. We say you don't do yibam, you do chalitza. But what type of relative was that? That was a mitzvah, shnia. It's called the shnias. It's called the rabbinic. It's close enough to be considered a prohibited marriage rabbinically, but it's not like incest, like a close family. It's more distant. The Gemara is asking them, why do we have to repeat it again? It says, Hasim itzer mitzvah lechudei, hacha itzer mitzvah va'achaysa.
Some of the ways before, page before.
Yeah. We're saying that over there, we said this din, not when there were two sisters. We said this din when there was one wife, but she was the brother's wife, the brother's widow. The brother passed away, left his widow, and there's a remaining brother that could do yibam. The problem is that this remaining brother that's going to do yibam is slightly related to the wife. What type of relative is it? It's a shnia. It's a rabbinic type relative, a great aunt. So it says you do chalitza. Over here, we're talking about that there's two sisters, plus one of them is a relative. So here it's much more complex. So I could have thought like this. I'm sorry?
If the brother is somewhat related, wouldn't the brother that was married also been somewhat related in the same capacity?
Yeah. It could be and could be not. Could be that it's his
Unless they're half
mother-in-law's.
brothers.
No, it could be half brothers. It could also be it's a mother-in-law's thing. His wife's mother's mother or something. That could be somehow a shnia. I don't remember all the shnias. I have my paper here. Yeah, I don't know about the mother-in-law actually. What would be a shnia? It could be from his mother's side. What would be a shnia? Is his mother's father's second wife. It's a shnia. Maybe they shared brothers. They shared a father. These two brothers, and not the mother.
So in either case, it would be because they were half brothers.
Yeah, half brothers.
Because if there was full brothers,
Yeah,
it'd be a surah to him as well.
right. Although we did have another shnia, kalas bitai. No, kalas benai, his son's daughter-in-law. That was a shnia as well. You see, that could be very clear. I mean, two brothers. One of them has a son that has a daughter that has one of them has a son that has a son that has a wife. That wife, if then the grandson divorces her, would be permissible to the grandfather biblically, but not rabbinically, which would not be related to the brother. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: say maybe we should do yibum over here. It's a chayse kukase. It's a sister of someone that he's eligible to marry. And not only is he eligible to marry, it's a sister of someone that he's quasi married to. It's a zakuk liyivim. It's an attachment. There's an attachment there. It's not really a marriage, but it's an attachment which doesn't look right. So we could say, yeah, but he's related to one of them. So that relative takes it off. Who created the problem of marrying a sister of someone that you're attached to? The rabbis. So the Gemara says like this. B'tisyabim, you could do yibam, given the midiraisa ramya, kamei, kapaga b'chayse kukase. Biblically, he's allowed to marry both of them. So how could you tell me that because the rabbi said that this one of them is prohibited, so then it's not considered a chayse kukase because practically he can't marry one of them because the rabbi said so, but biblically he can. So if it biblically he can, then it's a chayse kukase, then it's someone that biblically he's still attached to the sister. The Gemara says, "Well, sal kadait chamina mishum mitzvah avoid avod rabbanon kamash malan." The whole gezeira of achayse kukase was only rabbinic. So the gezeira of achayse kukase, together with the fact that you can't marry this woman, maybe the rabbis will look in their same notebook, and they will see that we created the problem of achayse kukase. We also created the problem of shniyas. So we should match it up. We should say that this problem of chayse kukase should work together with that it's a shniya and it's not a chayse kukase. Where it says no, kamashlam, we don't do that. We say a chayse kukase is an independent decree. It's a sister of someone that you have an attachment to, and you're not allowed to marry her. It's actually not a sister of someone that you have an attachment because you couldn't marry her anyway. Because it's a relative, so that's only a rabbinic relative. Okay. Now we're quoting the Mishnah. This is if they both remaining brothers have a close relative in the amongst these two sisters. One of them is Rachel related to, one of them is Leah is related to Leah. The Gemara says, "Hasulam alei hainohach, malichad malitrei." Why do you have to tell me this case? It's exactly the same. What's the difference if it's one or if it's two? What's the difference if each one has a relative or if one of them has a relative, the same thing applied. When Ruvain had a relative amongst Rachel and Leah, that Leah was his daughter, let's say, so then he was allowed to do Yivam on Rachel because there was only one sister there that he was attached to. So if Shimon has a relative also, Rachel is his daughter, so there's only one left that he can do Yivam on, which is Leah. What's the difference, one or two? So the Gemara says Tzricha. The Yashmin and Hasam Mishum Dekasheni Demucha. No, remember what we said? If you do Yibam and a Chaysikukasai, even though you have a heter, but it looks like a Chaysikukasai is mutter. It looks like you're allowed to marry one of the widows that are sisters, and really it's prohibited. But when you have in that same case the other brother that is not allowed to marry, he needs to do chalitza on one of them, on both. He needs to do chalitza on the remaining one. He's not allowed to do yibam on the remaining one. So that tells me, chayzik ukasa is aser. But over here, when both of them are going to be doing yibam, it's not going to show me that in the rest of the world, when this scenario ever happens, that it's going to be aser. We're going to think that chayzik ukasa is mutter. Aval hachad lakasheni kamucha chemalai. So just say it over there, where you have one is a relative and one isn't a relative. You have an example of where it's permissible. You have an example where it's prohibited. If it would say it over there, then I would have everything. But if it would say it here, then this should tell me that I'm not concerned about that. I need to know what's in the world. So adarabba tavai muchadadi aval idach lai tzricha. What this means is that in our case, we could have thought that it's only in our case. We have both of them are a relative of one of the wives. Reuven is his daughter is one of the widows, and Shimon's daughter is the other widow. We said that they can do yibam on the opposite one, on the one that wasn't his daughter. Let's say that over there, it's very clear why we're not concerned about a chaysik ukasa, because each one is the daughter, and so it's not a chaysik ukasa. But if that's the case we would have, then it wouldn't teach me one detail. And if I would have another case where there's only one of them has a relative, but the other one is not a relative, I could have thought that maybe the same way this one is permissible, that one is permissible, or maybe the opposite. But it's the same way this one is prohibited, then that one is also prohibited. So, let me see how he writes that. Wants to say that I would have thought they're both prohibited or both permissible. Yeah. Each of the brothers married a specific sister-in-law. The woman was not his close relative, indicating that it does not have a lever bond with the other sister. But in the other case, when one brother is allowed and the second brother is forbidden, I might say that no, we would not allow marriage to the first brother either. Yeah, we would say strict. Therefore, it is necessary to state the halach in both instances. Why? Because maybe I would have thought that if we allow one of them, then we maybe will allow the other one. So we can't allow any of them. So it has to tell me that even though and only one of them is permissible, that one that's permissible would be permissible. We don't make it forbidden because the other one isn't permissible. Okay. Now the Mishnah said, Zui Shamro. Zui Shamro. Get ready. It goes back to the nice hard piece. Yeah. So you can handle this one. We said what we just discussed explains an earlier quote from the sages that there's sometimes that a sister you can do Yibam or Chalitza on. How? Because one of them is a relative. All right. That's what we've been talking about the whole time. No big chiddush there. The Gemara just says, this is what the sages have said, that a chaysa, a sister, when it's a Yevama, you can still do, when you can still do Yibam, you don't have to only do Chalitza. Why? Sisters, we said, a chaysa kasi, you have to do Chalitza. We said, well, if one of them is a relative, then the Yibam is performed on the other one. Gemara says, Zuhi lemute mai. What are you saying, Zuhi? This is with a statement. Well, it says lemute is a mitzvah. Lazeh is a mitzvah lazeh. It's coming to exclude if one of them was not really a relative because it was only a rabbinic relative, then we won't say the same rule. It says Hasulamali hainohach mali chad mali trei. We said that before, that if one of them is a relative, what's the difference if one of them is a rabbinic relative, that this exemption doesn't apply, this exception doesn't apply. So now you're telling me both of them are rabbinic relatives, that it doesn't, what's the difference? So ma'al de tema, kila amrin nuki is a mitzvah b'makam is erva, echad dekala migzar mishum sheni, aval hechad lekala migzar mishum sheni, ema lahayuk ukimna is a mitzvah, ema lahayuk kimna is a mitzvah makam is maybe I could have actually made a distinction, and I could have said that when there's only one brother that has this close relative, we say that a semi-close relative, not really close, it's only rabbinically, we would say that we don't want to allow that because there's a decree that maybe the second one may be confused with this one. If you allow this one, maybe you should be allowing the other one to marry one of the sisters. But here, we're saying both of them have this close relative. Well, it's a rabbinic relative. I should say that maybe we don't have a concern about what we're going to do with the other one. And because both of them are related. Reuven is related to one of them, and Shimon is related to one of them. So I would say that it's as if it's a full relative. Rabbinic relative would be just like a full relative. So Kamash Malan, that I don't say that, and we say that it's prohibited to do Yiba. Okay. Amrav Yudah Marav. We had this Gemara that we're saying right now, we had before on Daf Tes. And boy, was this a story. Remember we had, in the first Mishnah, we had 15 relatives that not only were you not allowed to do Yibam on your brother's wife, that was that relative, but you weren't allowed to do Yibam on the co-wife either. What does it mean, the co-wife? Let's say Shimon passed away and he left a wife, left two wives. One of those wives was Reuven's daughter, his brother's daughter, his niece. And then there was another wife, Sprinza, whatever. So Reuven can't do Yibam on his daughter, of course, but he can't do Yibam even on the co-wife. Yeah. So there's another brother, Levi. He does Yibam on the co-wife. Now it turns out that Levi had another wife, Miriam, Chana, whatever. So then Levi passed away. So now Reuven can't do Yibam on any of Levi's wives because one of them was a co-wife previously with his daughter, which was prohibited to him as his brother's wife. And now, even though now she was married to Levi and Levi passed away, it never becomes permitted. That's what we said. It continues on if there would be Yisachas, God and Usher. Would continue on. There would all those women would be prohibited back on Reuven because once early on Shimon in his was married to two wives. One of them was his daughter. Okay. What happens There's two sisters.
Rabbi, if they're no longer married, why is that a problem?
What
If they were
happens?
if he was previously married, Sprinza and Rachel, right? What's the problem if now Levi did the Yibum on Sprinza and is no longer connected to Rachel? Why is that still?
Yeah. So what
an
happens
issue?
is like this: that if a person's wife would pass away, he would be allowed to marry her sister.
Correct,
Yeah.
as long as it's not in the same lifetime.
It's not the same lifetime. When a person's brother passes away and he has a wife, so only if the mitzvah of Yibam is there is he allowed to marry his sister-in-law, that sister, his brother's wife. If there's no mitzvah of Yibam, then she remains the prohibition of a sister-in-law. He's not allowed to marry her. So at the very first marriage of Shimon with Rachel and Sprinza, so Shimon passed away. Ruvain had a prohibition on not on Rachel. Rachel was his daughter, but on Sprinza as his brother's wife, and he wasn't allowed to do Yibam because of the tzara. We learned from a pasuk that the tzara has the same. Okay, so now she is always prohibited.
Even once another brother does
brother
Yibum,
marries her.
because when he does the Yibum, she is no longer connected to the previous.
No, she still retains that status of being a sister-in-law. You see, because a brother passing away doesn't free up a sister-in-law unless there's the mitzvah of Yibum. And because the mitzvah of Yibum didn't apply, so she just remains a sister-in-law. So that would continue on, that she remains a sister-in-law.
I thought the case is when the mitzvah of Yibum is there, when he does.
Yeah, true.
So then
but
she
because
disconnects.
She's tzara to a relative, so the mitzvah of Yibum doesn't apply. Yeah, imagine just like they had children, then the mitzvah of Yibum won't apply. The mitzvah of Yibum doesn't apply also if it's a tzara of a relative, a co-wife of a relative. Actually, I think we said it's midaraisa. Litzra, tzara. We learned from the first few blocks. We had some psukim that told us that din tzara, co-wife, being prohibited was a deraisa. I think we had that. Yeah, that was the machlekes Beishami and Beis Hillel. That was the big machlekes. Was the tzara prohibited? Okay. So what happens now is if I have two sisters, each of them are married, the case that we had before, we can really go through all 15 cases of the Mishnah and say why Yibum should be allowed to be performed on the other brother's wife by Ruvain, and Yibum should be performed by Shimon on the opposite brother's wife. Why? Because both of them, remember we said the case of the daughter, that Ruvain lives with a woman and has a daughter, Leah. Shimon lives with the same woman and has a daughter, Rachel. Rachel and Leah then marry Levi and Yehuda. Now, Levi and Yehuda pass away. Ruvain is allowed to do Yibam on one, and Shimon is allowed to do Yibam on the other one. They're sisters. We said, but so what? It's not a chaysik ukasei, because it's not the sister of someone that he's attached to, because he has no attachment to that one because she's prohibited because she's his daughter. There's only really one here that's eligible for Yibam. There's only one attachment to each of them. So Rav Yehuda says, name of Rav, and Rav Chia taught that in all 15 cases, I just did it with the daughter, but you can go on with the mother-in-law and you can go on with all 15, and you can say why asura lazeh, muteres lazeh, asura lazeh. How does it go? Asura lazeh, muteres lazeh, v'chaisa k'shiyavim teicheletz l'sei misyavemis. And you could do Yibam on the opposite one. Okay. We have three interpretations of what Reb Chia said. Interpretation number one. Rabbi Yehuda metargem mechamay sevelech. Rabbi Yehuda says it's only referring to the mother-in-law and on. This one married. What are we talking about? Levi married Reuven's mother-in-law, and Yehuda marries Shimon's mother-in-law. Then Levi and Yehuda pass away, so Reuven can marry through Yibaman Shimon's mother-in-law, and Reuven can do Yibaman on Shimon's mother-in-law. And Shimon can do Yibaman Reuven's mother-in-law, which were the wives of Levi and Yehuda, but not the previous relatives. There's a son, there's the daughter and the daughter's daughter. All of those relatives at the beginning of the Mishnah, the first six relatives. Those it doesn't apply. This concept of what's permitted to this one is forbidden to this one. Why not? So he explains like this. But the first six clauses, first six cases, it's impossible for Reuven and Shimon to both have daughters that are sisters and be through marriage. Because if Reuven married her, Shimon is not allowed to marry her. So how does Reuven have a daughter with Miriam? And Shimon, what's Shimon going to do? Marry Miriam? It's his brother's wife, even if he divorced her. Okay, maybe Reuven passed away without children. You just told me he had a daughter. Right? So it doesn't apply. Huh? No, it doesn't work like that. I think any children, right? Any children. Yeah. So the only way that that's possible is if he raped Reuven. Well, it doesn't have to be rape. He lived with a woman and had a daughter, and Shimon lived with the same woman and had a daughter. Now they're sisters, and those two daughters then got married to their uncles. Then the uncles passed away, and now Reuven is related to one of the wives, and Shimon is related to the other one of the wives. But through marriage, it's impossible. Rabbi Yehuda says that Reb Chia is not talking about, and our Mishnah is not talking about cases that are only possible without a marriage. We're only talking about regular, normal marriage cases. Yeah.
So they were married to this third woman.
No, that way.
They had wives, but they went with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the daughter of that woman got married to the brothers of this fellow. The two brothers married the two daughters. Okay. Yeah, I see. He's showing me a complicated picture. Yeah, I see. Thank you. Okay. We're not dealing with Einstein literally means rape. We're dealing only with marriages. That's Rav Yehuda's interpretation of Reb Chia. Abaya is the second interpretation of Reb Chia. Abaya says no, it's talking about the first cases as well, even with the daughter. Why? Look, that case is possible. However you want it, we'll figure it out. Either with marriage or without marriage. That's one of the cases. I mean, the Mishnah is 15 cases, and what's prohibited to this one is permitted to that one. Sometimes it's marriage, sometimes not. However, Abaya comes in and says, however, I have to tell you that one of the cases actually doesn't fit according to Reb Chia. Which case? Not that case. That means a brother that was not alive during the first marriage. After, who was it? Reuven, Shimon, Levi.
Not alive when the brother died.
he was not alive when the brother died. He's only born later. Yeah, in that case, it's going to be impossible for this to work. Why? Because see in a second. Even though Libeder Reb Shimon the Mishkachsal, Libeder Rabbanon le Mishkachsla, the plukta like a Mairi. He says our Mishnah is not dealing with any machlekasin. And because it's only possible for one brother to be permissible to this one, and the other brother is only permissible to that one, how is that possible? Only according to the opinion of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon has this concept. You see, really, according to the Rabbanon, let me give you the exact story here. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Levi and Yehuda are married to two other women, not related at all. Reuven and Shimon pass away. I'm sorry. Reuven passes away. When Reuven passes away, their mother of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda gives birth to one more child, Yisachar. Now, Reuven's wife is prohibited to Yisachar because Yisachar was not alive when Reuven was alive. So then, Yisachar can't do Yibam on Reuven's wife, but so what? Shimon can. Now, I'm sorry. Let's not say that Shimon, because Shimon was a sister. Shimon's wife was a sister, so Shimon can't do Yibam on. So Levi does Yibam. Then Shimon passes away, and another brother's born, Zvulun.
Rabbi, that's the chart that I just sent on the chat.
Oh, that's the chart. So
that's
then,
the chart. I just sent it out to the group.
Yeah, if you want to look on your phone, you'll see this. Then Yehuda does Yibam. Levi couldn't do Yibam because it's his wife, his new wife's sister. So Yehuda does Yibam. Now, these two brothers that have just done Yibam pass away. Who's left to do Yibam? The new brothers that just arrived, Yisachar and Zavulun. But Yisachar was prohibited to Reuben's wife.
Thank you for the chart. It's really good.
And Yehuda is prohibited, and Zavulun is prohibited to Yehuda's wife because both of them were born. Both of them, Yisachar and Zavulun, were born after the death of the very first husband, which is Reuven and Shimon. Okay, so in that case, we could have said Asur lazem mutar lazeh, Asur lazem mutar lazeh. Now, what's the reason that we can say that? Is because Reb Shimon holds it's only according to Reb Shimon that we would say that, because Reb Shimon holds two sisters. That is it. Reb Shimon holds there's a difference if the boy was born before the Yibam was performed or after the Yibam was performed. If Yisachar is born after Levi does Yibam on Reuven's wife, then Yisachar would be permitted to Reuven's wife because he was born when she was already married. But if Yisachar is born beforehand, then she remains prohibited. Problem is, how is Zvulun mutter to Ruvain's wife? How is Zvulun mutter to Ruvain? He was for sure not born when Ruvain was alive. The answer is because when Zvulun was born, Ruvain's wife had already done Yibam. And who holds that's acceptable? Only Reb Shimon. So Abaya says that our Mishnah is not talking about a machlekes. Okay, let me go further. Plukta like a Mari. Rav Safra metargam afa esha sachiv shleya beilam mishkachas labashita achiv alibad Reb Shimon. Rav Safra says no. It's actually talking about exactly that complicated case that we just said. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehudi, Yisachar, Zvulun, and it's following Reb Shimon. V'simanach. And if you want to remember how this works, it works like this: Mace, Reuven passes away. Noilad, I'm adding in the names here. Yisachar is born. V'yibem, and Levi does Yibam on Reuven's wife. Mace, Shimon passes away. Noilad, that would be Zvulun. Zvulun is born. V'yibem, and Yehuda does Yibam on where are we holding? On Shimon's wife. Okay. And now the Gemara elaborates. Reuven, Shimon, Naisim, Shtei Achayis. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters. Levi, Yehuda, Nesuin, Shtei Nachrias, and Levi and Yehuda are married to two other women. Why is that relevant? Because we need to have the story of the tzara in here. We need to also have that there's a co-wife. Meis, Reuven, Nailad, Yisachar. The Yibam Levi. Reuven passed away, and then their mother has a mazel tov, has another boy, Yisachar. And then Levi comes along and does Yibam on Reuven's wife. Meis Shimon, so this mother actually loses a child. She has another baby. Meis Shimon Noilad Zvulun v'Yibam Yehuda. And Shimon passed away, and Zvulun is born. And Yehuda does Yibam. Meis Levi, Yehuda B'leiban, and Levi and Yehuda passed away. The two new Yevams passed away. Nafal Kamei Yisachar Zvulun. And the two brothers that were recently born are now have to do Yibam on either the wives or the co-wives. So Hasula Zematas Zev, Hasula Zematas Zev. Bachesik Shiyavimta, and the sister, that's the Yevama. Because now, remember, these were two sisters that they were married to. You can only marry one of them. So the Gemara asks now, Lamala Yibam Yehuda. Why do you have to add in that case where Yehuda did Yibam? Yibam Yehuda Nami Mishkachasla. It's the same story. Still two sisters. Remember, Reuven and Shimon's wives were sisters. Reuven passed away, and Shimon passed away. Every time one passed away, another brother was born. Now it turns out that Shimon, that Levi does Yibam on this one, but it doesn't matter if Yehuda does Yibam, because Yisachar was born after Reuven passed away, and Zvulun was born after Shimon passed away. It's still a Surah Lazem Mataris Lazem. Zvulun is going to be permissible to the one that was to Reuven's widow, because he was born after Yibam was performed. So whether Yehuda does Yibam or not, Reuven's widow is going to be usher Reuven's widow is going to be permissible to Zvulun and prohibited and Shimon's widow is going to be prohibited. So the Gemara answers Mishum Tzara. We wanted to tell you about Reuven's about the co-wife of Yehuda, that she's also prohibited. That's what we're telling you. What about the tzara? You didn't tell me about that. It could go on. It says, it could go into Hadavi of Minug, Nami, God ve'asher. Who did Yibam over here? Yisachar Zvulun. Then if Yisachar and Zvulun passed away, and they had co-wives, and Gad and Asher were born, would Gad and Asher be allowed to do the Yibam on them? Also, they would have the same issue of the tzara over there. It would be tzara. Okay, let's leave it over here.
Thank you.
Good
Take
day.
care. Have a great day. Relative.
Thank you.